The transmission lasted exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of audio, broadcast on every known frequency simultaneously, sent from a single human vessel that should not have been where it was, in a region of space that 3 different galactic civilizations had spent the last 2 years carving up between themselves like it was theirs to divide. The vessel was not a warship. It was not a diplomatic cruiser. It was a survey ship, the UES Margaret Hale, a modest science and exploration vessel with a crew of 61, armed with nothing more significant than the standard point defense system that all human ships carried the way humans carried car insurance, not because they expected to need it, but because the universe had a sense of humor. The transmission lasted 4 seconds. And then every war fleet in the Kalvari contested zone, Vrethian heavy cruisers, Sundari siege platforms, Dunhari carrier groups, 47 vessels representing 3 of the most battle-hardened military civilizations in the known galaxy, went completely silent. Not silent like a pause, silent like a held breath, silent like the moment after lightning when you are waiting to find out how close the thunder is going to be. The silence lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. And then one by one they withdrew. All of them. Every single one. Margaret Hale's captain was a woman named Dorothea Sinclair, and she was 63 years old, which meant she had been born 11 years after the Vrethian War ended, and had grown up in the generation that had learned the galaxy was not empty, and had spent most of her adult life deciding that this was not going to be a problem. She had short white hair and the kind of deeply weathered face that comes from spending 30 years on survey vessels in deep space, and she had a habit of drinking her coffee black and speaking very slowly when she was angry, which made her slower than usual on the morning. The Margaret Hale dropped out of FTL in the middle of what her navigation officer immediately and urgently described as an extremely active combat zone. "Define active," Sinclair said. Lieutenant Commander Faris Akaffer, her navigation officer, was 28 years old and very good at his job, and had gone a particular shade of pale that Sinclair had learned to recognize over the years as the color a person turned when math was producing answers they did not want. He pulled up the sensor display and turned it toward her without speaking. She looked at it for 4 seconds. She said, 47 vessels. 3 distinct drive signatures, Vrethian, Sundari, Dunhari, active weapons, multiple vessels showing damage. The debris field to port suggested the engagement had been going on for somewhere between 6 and 10 hours. The Margaret Hale had dropped out of FTL directly into the middle of it, because the Kalvari contested zone was technically uncharted on human navigational databases, not because humans hadn't been here before, but because when humans had last cataloged this region, 14 years ago, it had been empty and peaceful and full of interesting geological formations, and nobody had sent an update. This was, Sinclair reflected, the sort of bureaucratic gap that got people killed. "Are we being targeted?" she asked. "Not yet," Akaffer said. I think they're surprised we're here." "That makes 2 of us." Sinclair set down her coffee. "Get me communications." Her communications officer, Ensign Yolanda Park, was 24 and had been on her first deep survey assignment for 7 months, and had the expression of someone who had trained extensively for emergencies, but had secretly hoped she would never encounter one. "Captain, I'm getting targeting locks from multiple vessels. Vrethian, 2 of them, and 1 Sundari platform is." "I see it," Sinclair said. "Open a channel, all frequencies." To all of them." "All of them," Sinclair confirmed, simultaneously. Park opened the channel. Sinclair leaned forward slightly in her command chair. She thought for exactly 2 seconds about what she was going to say. She thought about the 47 warships outside, about the 3 civilizations that had been tearing this region of space apart for 2 years, about the debris field to port and the active weapons signatures, and the targeting locks that her point defense system was tracking with the focused attention of a small animal that knows it is very much outnumbered. She thought about the 4 words. They were not dramatic words. They were not threatening words. They were not even particularly eloquent words. They were just the truest thing she could think of to say in the moment, and she had learned in 30 years of survey work that the truest thing was usually the most effective thing. She said 4 words. The transmission lasted 4 seconds. To understand why 4 words had the effect they did, you needed to understand something about the Kelvari contested zone and the 3 civilizations fighting over it. And you needed to understand something about humanity's particular reputation in the galaxy at this point in history, 38 years after the Meridian Accord. The Kelvari system itself was resource-rich in the particular way that caused civilizations to make very bad decisions. Beneath the ice of its 3 outer planets lay deposits of crystallized varanthium, a material with energy storage properties that made every existing power technology look like a child's toy by comparison. The Vrethian Collective had discovered it 14 years ago. The Sundari Dominion had found out about it 11 years ago. The Dunhari Federation had picked up chatter about it 9 years ago. And for the last 2 years, all 3 of them had been in various stages of fighting each other over who got to claim it, in a conflict that had so far killed approximately 400,000 soldiers across 3 species and shown no signs whatsoever of resolving itself. None of them had told humanity about the varanthium. This was not an accident. Humanity, in the 38 years since the Meridian Accord, had developed a reputation. Not a reputation for aggression exactly. The Accord itself was proof that humans preferred negotiated solutions when negotiated solutions were available. Not a reputation for expansion, although humanity had expanded considerably, with 17 colony systems now established and more in development. Not even a reputation for military power, although the UES Dominion and her 3 sister ships were well known to every spacefaring civilization in the region, and none of them had forgotten what it meant that those ships existed. Humanity's reputation was harder to categorize than any of those things. It was more like a story that got told, in various forms, at diplomatic functions and military briefings, and the quieter conversations that happened between junior officers late at night when the senior staff had gone to bed. The story went like this. Humanity was the species that you did not corner. You could fight them carefully on your terms, with sufficient advantage and a clear exit strategy. You could negotiate with them, and they were actually quite reasonable at the table when they believed you were dealing with them in good faith. You could trade with them, study them, form alliances with them, and they were good partners, loyal and consistent and occasionally baffling in ways that were more charming than concerning. But if you cornered them, if you pushed them into a situation where they had nothing left to lose and nowhere left to go, something happened that the galaxy's more experienced civilizations had no clean word for. It was not rage exactly. It was not desperation. It was something more like a switch being thrown in a very large machine, a switch that had no reverse setting, and once it was thrown, the machine ran until there was nothing left to run against. The 3 colony ships in 2171, the Battle of the Sol approach, 16 years of a war that the Vrethian Collective had been absolutely certain they would win in months, the Dominion rising from the ice of Europa. Every military strategist in every spacefaring civilization within communication range had studied those events. Every one of them had reached the same conclusion. Do not corner humanity. The Kelvari situation was not about humanity. Humanity didn't know about the varanthium. The 3 civilizations fighting over it had been careful to keep the conflict contained, away from human shipping lanes, away from human survey paths, away from anything that might attract human attention. They had their own reasons for not wanting humanity involved, some strategic, some related to the straightforward fact that if humanity knew about varanthium, humanity would have opinions about varanthium. And dealing with a 3-way conflict was already complicated enough without adding a 4th party that had a history of building things in secret that changed the shape of wars. So they had been careful. And then the Margaret Hale had dropped out of FTL in the middle of their battle, because of a 14-year-old cataloging gap in human navigational databases. And Dorothea Sinclair had opened a channel on all frequencies and said 4 words, and everything had changed. The 4 words were, "Stand down, we're here." On the bridge of the Vrethian heavy cruiser Unyielding Patience, Supreme Commander Rethkoval received the transmission and did not move for approximately 8 seconds, which was, for a Vrethian of his experience and rank, an extraordinarily long time to do nothing. His tactical officer said something he didn't immediately process. His communications officer confirmed the source, a human survey vessel, 61 crew, minimal armament, definitely not a warship. His first officer said carefully, "Commander, they appear to be unarmed." "They are not unarmed," Rethkoval said. "Sir, the sensor readings indicate." "I'm not talking about their weapons loadout." He turned from the display to look at his first officer, a much younger Vrethian who had been born after the Meridian Accord and had studied the human war in academy as history rather than living through it as reality. "Pull up the Meridian files, the tactical assessment from the Saul approach, the post-war analysis of the Dominion program." His first officer blinked. "Sir, we're in the middle of an engagement." "Pull them up," Rethkoval said quietly, "and then tell me again that they are unarmed." On the Sundari siege platform Absolute Reckoning, Fleet Admiral Vassarathen received the transmission and immediately called for a full sensor sweep of the surrounding space. The Margaret Hale was alone, no escort, no accompanying vessels, nothing on long-range sensors to suggest that a larger human force was lurking somewhere nearby, waiting. "It's a single survey ship," her tactical analyst confirmed. "No military designation, crew complement approximately 60. And they just said, 'Stand down, we're here.'" Her communications officer played it back. A human voice, female, older, speaking with the particular quality of calm that the Sundari Tactical Database described in the section on human psychology as the most dangerous register of human communication. Not shouting, not threatening, just certain, as though the outcome was not in question. Vassarathen had been in 3 wars. She had never once, in 3 wars, heard anyone communicate with that quality of certainty while sitting in an unarmed survey ship in the middle of an active combat zone with 47 warships around them. "Get me our intelligence attaché," she said. "Admiral." The human specialist, "Get her now." On the Dunhari carrier Hammer of Conviction, Admiral-designate Porith Gavin received the transmission and said, almost to himself, "Oh, this is not good." His flag captain looked at him, "Admiral." "For us," Gavin clarified, "this is not good for us." He had spent 4 years attached to a diplomatic mission near human space before taking his current posting, and he had in that time developed what he considered a reasonably sophisticated understanding of humanity, which was more than most Dunhari officers could claim. He understood, for instance, the particular significance of the phrase they had just heard. "Stand down," he said. "That's an instruction, not a request, not a suggestion, an instruction." He looked at his flag captain. "And we're here. Think about what that means." "It means they've arrived," his flag captain said carefully. "It means they know," Gavin said. "About Kelvari, about the Varanthium, about all of it. A survey ship doesn't come here by accident, not to this specific location, not during an active engagement. They're here because they know, and they want us to know they know, and they are telling us." He stopped, looked at the display showing the modest, unremarkable profile of the UES Margaret Hale sitting in the middle of 47 warships like it had every right to be there. "They are telling us that they are paying attention." His flag captain was quiet for a moment. Then, "Should we be concerned about what comes after the survey ship?" Gavin looked at him. "We should be concerned about what that survey ship's captain is going to put in her report when she gets back to human space, and what happens after the report." Dorothea Sinclair did not know, in the seconds after she transmitted those 4 words, exactly what effect they would have. She knew what she hoped. She knew what 30 years of experience in deep space told her about the value of projecting absolute calm in moments of maximum uncertainty. She knew what every human who had grown up in the post-Accord galaxy knew about the weight those words carried, about what it meant for humanity to show up somewhere unannounced and announce itself. What she had not fully predicted was the speed of it. The first targeting lock disengaged 40 seconds after transmission. It was a Vrethian cruiser, the unyielding Patience, as her sensors identified it, and the disengagement was followed, 11 seconds later, by a reduction in the cruiser's weapon's power signature from active to standby. "They're standing down," Akafor said, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who is watching something he had assigned a very low probability actually happen. Sinclair said. 3 minutes later, a Sundari platform followed, then a second Vrethian vessel, then in a cluster, 4 Dunhari ships, then in what felt almost like a cascade the rest. 6 minutes and 40 seconds after transmission, every weapon in the Kelvari contested zone was at standby or below. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. "Captain," Park said from communications, her voice very quiet, I'm getting hails from all 3 sides. They all want to speak to you." "Tell them I'll take the calls in order," Sinclair said. "Vrethian first, then Sundari, then Dunhari." She picked up her coffee. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. "And someone please update our navigational database for this system. I'd like to know what we actually dropped into before I talk to anyone." What she had dropped into, as her science officer explained over the next 20 minutes while she waited for the communications queue to organize itself, was a 2-year-old conflict over one of the largest known deposits of crystallized varanthium in the charted galaxy, a resource whose energy storage properties were, her science officer explained with increasing excitement, approximately 40 times more efficient than anything currently in human use. Sinclair listened to this explanation. She listened to the projected applications, propulsion, power generation, weapon systems. She listened to the estimated scale of the deposit. She was quiet for a moment. "And none of them told us," she said. Her science officer, a young man named Dr. Emmett Cho, had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "It seems they were, the diplomatic channels." "None of them told us," Sinclair said again, not angry, just nodding it, filing it. "No," Dr. Cho confirmed. Sinclair set down her coffee cup with a small, precise click. "Right," she said. "Put the Vrethian commander through." Supreme Commander Reth Koval appeared on her display and looked at her with those gold, wide, unblinking eyes that Sinclair had seen in briefings and documentaries, but never in person. He was older than she had expected, old even by Vrethian standards, which meant genuinely ancient by human ones. He studied her for a moment. Then he said in careful, precise English, "Captain Sinclair." "Commander Reth Koval," she said. "Your arrival here was unexpected." "I imagine it was," she said. "We had a gap in our navigational database. It's been corrected." A pause, "And your transmission?" "Yes." "You said stand down, we're here." He paused again. "A survey vessel, 61 crew, minimal armament." "That's correct," Sinclair said. His jaw patches, she knew about those from briefings, shifted through a color she couldn't quite name. And yet, she agreed. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, not softer exactly, but more direct, the way very senior people sometimes drop the diplomatic register when they've decided to say something true. "What do you want, Captain? What does humanity want with Kelvari?" Sinclair looked at him. She thought about 47 warships standing down in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. She thought about 2 years of war and 400,000 dead, and crystallized varanthium in the ice of 3 planets. She thought about the way those 4 words had sounded when she said them, not a threat. Never a threat, just the simple announcement of a presence that carried its own weight. "That's not a conversation I'm equipped to have," she said. "That's above my pay grade, Commander. I'm a survey captain. I'll make my report and the people who make those decisions will make them. She paused. But I'll tell you what I can tell you. Please, he said. Humanity doesn't want a war, she said. We've had one war. We know what they cost. We're not looking for another one. She held his gaze through the display. But humanity also isn't going to pretend it didn't see something it saw. And we're not going to be kept out of conversations about regions of space that affect us just because 3 other civilizations decided to have those conversations without us. Rethkoval was quiet. A gap in your navigational database, he said finally. A gap in our navigational database, she confirmed. And it has now been corrected. It has now been corrected, she said. His patches shifted again. Something about the color made her think of the word resigned, though she couldn't have said exactly why. I see, he said. I expect you do, Sinclair said. The calls with the Sundari Admiral and the Dunhari Admiral Designate followed similar patterns. Both were more overtly anxious than Rethkoval, less practiced at concealing it, or perhaps just more alarmed by what had happened and what it meant. The Sundari Admiral asked, 3 separate times in slightly different ways, whether the Margaret Hale had contacted other human vessels. Sinclair answered honestly each time, not yet. The Dunhari Admiral asked, with a directness she found almost refreshing, whether humanity intended to claim Kelvari. That's not my decision, she told him. But you'll recommend it, he said, in your report. She looked at him, a heavy-set being with dark, iridescent scales and eyes that caught the light in ways she found genuinely beautiful, and considered the question seriously. I'll report what I found, she said, accurately and completely. What happens after that isn't up to me. It never is, he said. With your people, it is never the person in the room who decides. It is always the report and then the council and then the ship that comes after. She said nothing to that. Is there a ship coming after? He asked. Sinclair looked out through the viewport at the now-still fleet around her. 47 warships in 3 distinct configurations, all of them at standby, all of them waiting, all of them stopped by 4 words from an unarmed survey vessel. There's always a ship coming after, she said. That's just how we work. She spent 2 more days in the Kelvari system. She ran full surveys of all 3 outer planets, cataloged the Varanthium deposits with her science team, compiled a complete record of the engagement she had interrupted, the damage assessments, the casualty estimates, the tactical positions of all 3 fleets. She was thorough. She had always been thorough. 30 years of survey work had made thoroughness as natural to her as breathing. The 3 fleets watched her the whole time. Nobody fired. Nobody threatened. Nobody moved, in fact, with any particular purpose. They maintained positions, ran their own assessments, transmitted a great deal of encrypted communication back to their respective home systems. But on the surface of things in the Kelvari system itself, everything was very quiet. On the 2nd day, Rethkoval hailed her again. A question, he said, if you don't mind. Go ahead, she said. Your words when you transmitted. He paused. Stand down, we're here. Did you know what effect they would have? Sinclair considered the question honestly. I knew what I hoped, she said. I didn't know for certain. But you believed it would work. I believed it was the truest thing I could say, she said. In my experience, the truest thing usually works best. His patches moved, and if it had not worked, if we had not stood down. She looked at him steadily. Then I would have put it in my report, she said, and the people who make decisions would have made decisions, and you would have found out what happens after. He was quiet for a long time. You said we're here, he said finally, not I am here, we. That's right. You meant humanity. I meant humanity, she confirmed. His patches went through 3 colors in quick succession, with 61 crew and minimal armament. The number of people on this ship, Sinclair said carefully, has never been the relevant figure. She filed her report on the 3rd day and began the journey back toward human space. As the Margaret Hale spun up for FTL, She stood at the viewport on the bridge and watched the Calvari system recede. The three outer planets with their ice and their impossible treasure underneath. The three fleets still holding position, still waiting, still quiet. Dr. Cho appeared at her shoulder. "Captain, what do you think is going to happen? With Calvari, I mean, the negotiations." "There will be negotiations," she said. "You're sure?" "They stood down," she said. "All three of them. That means they're already negotiating in their own way. They're just waiting to find out who they're negotiating with on our end." Cho was quiet for a moment. "Do you think we'll get a seat at the table?" Sinclair watched the system shrink to a point of light, and then to nothing as the FTL drive engaged and the stars streaked, and then resolved into the familiar pattern of deep space transit. She thought about 4 words in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. She thought about 47 warships and what it meant that they had stopped. "We already have one," she said. The report reached the United Earth Council 22 days later. It was thorough, accurate, and complete, as all of Sinclair's reports were. It included full sensor data on the Varanthium deposits, complete tactical assessments of all 3 fleets, a detailed account of the conversations she had conducted, and a navigational update for the Calvari system. It also included, in the executive summary, a single paragraph that the Council would later cite as among the most consequential sentences in human diplomatic history. The paragraph read, "3 galactic civilizations have been at war for 2 years over resources in a region of space that, as of this survey, falls within the outer boundary of humanity's projected expansion corridor, as established under the Meridian Accord's secondary provisions. All 3 civilizations were aware of humanity's interest in the region and chose not to disclose the conflict or the resources involved. Upon our arrival and identification, all 3 fleets stood down within 7 minutes. I recommend that the Council move immediately to establish a formal diplomatic presence in the Calvari system, and that this presence be accompanied by appropriate assets. The 3 civilizations involved are ready to negotiate. They are waiting for us." The Council read the report in full session. The debate lasted 6 hours. It was, by historical accounts, a remarkably focused debate, not about whether to act, but about how quickly and with what resources. Admiral Constance Rowe, now 77 years old and technically retired but still in attendance as a senior advisory voice, listened to 6 hours of debate and then said, when asked for her assessment, 3 words: "Send the Dominion." There was a pause. "Admiral," said the Council Chair, "that may be perceived as an escalation." "It will be perceived," Rowe said, with the particular deliberate calm of a woman who had been right about these things before, as exactly what it is. "A statement of presence, not aggression. Presence." She folded her hands. "Captain Sinclair went in with 61 crew and no weapons to speak of and stopped a 2-year war in 7 minutes by saying 4 words. Imagine what the Dominion says just by showing up." The Council was quiet. "What does she say?" the chair asked. Rowe looked at him steadily. "The same thing she always says," she said. "We're here." The UES Dominion arrived in the Calvari system 31 days after the Margaret Hale's departure. She came in slow, the way she always did, not because she needed to, but because arriving slowly was its own kind of statement. 3 kilometers of human engineering dropping out of FTL at the edge of the system and taking her time about the approach, the way something very large and very certain of itself takes its time. The 3 fleets were still there, still holding position, waiting, as Sinclair had said, to find out who they were negotiating with. They found out. The Dominion's communications team opened channels to all 3 fleet commanders simultaneously, exactly the way Sinclair had, because that was the human approach. Everyone at once, everyone on the same frequency, no side conversations, no whispered deals. The message was simple and direct. "This is the UES Dominion. We're here to talk. All parties, same table, same time, will host. You'll come." It was not a question. 43 minutes later, all 3 fleet commanders had confirmed attendance. The negotiations for the Calvary Accord began 6 days after that, aboard the Dominion's diplomatic suite, a set of rooms that had been added in her third refit specifically for situations like this, because humanity had learned, in the decades since the Meridian Accord, that the most effective diplomatic room in the galaxy was one that sat inside 3 kilometers of the most powerful warship anyone had ever built. Not because the ship was a threat, because the ship was a fact. And facts, as Dorothea Sinclair had understood implicitly when she opened a channel to 47 warships with nothing but her voice and her certainty, were more persuasive than threats. The negotiations lasted 4 months. They were difficult, contentious, and at several points genuinely uncertain. The Varanthium question was complicated. The territorial questions were more complicated. The question of who had known what and when, and why humanity hadn't been told, was the most complicated of all, and Sinclair sat in on 3 sessions as a witness. Answering questions about the morning, she had dropped out of FTL in the wrong place at the wrong time and said 4 words that stopped a war. She answered all the questions honestly. She always did. The Calvary Accord, when it was finally signed, guaranteed humanity equal access to the system's resources, established a joint development framework between all 4 parties, and included a provision, insisted upon by the Dunhari Admiral-designate, who had developed a complicated respect for human directness in the months of negotiations, requiring that any future resource discoveries in the region be disclosed to all parties simultaneously. No more gaps. No more conversations happening without the relevant people in the room. Sinclair attended the signing ceremony. She stood in the back because she was a survey captain, and the people doing the signing were the ones whose job it was to sign things, and she was fine with that. She had done her part. She had been in the right place at the wrong time and said the right words. Afterward, the Dunhari Admiral-designate found her in the corridor outside the ceremony room. He was enormous in person. The iridescent scales caught the Dominion's interior lighting beautifully, and he looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Captain Sinclair," he said. "Admiral Gavon," she said. "I have been thinking," he said, "about what you said, when I asked if there was a ship coming after." "What about it?" "You said there's always a ship coming after, that it's just how you work." "That's right," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I have also been thinking about the 4 words, stand down, we're here." He studied her with those light-catching eyes. "Do you know what I find most remarkable about them?" "What's that?" "They are not a threat," he said. "There is no consequence stated, no ultimatum, no demonstration of force." He paused. "Just the announcement, just you telling 47 warships that you had arrived. And the assumption completely correct as it turned out that the arrival itself was sufficient." Sinclair nodded slowly. "That's about right." "How does a species develop that?" he asked. "That certainty, that I don't have the right word, that weight." Sinclair thought about it. She thought about it honestly, the way she did everything thoroughly, without rushing to a convenient answer. "I think," she said finally, "you develop it by being underestimated enough times. By having people decide you're not worth telling things to, not worth including, not worth worrying about. And then you show up anyway." She paused. "You do that enough times across enough centuries, the showing up starts to carry its own weight. People stop being surprised you're there and start assuming you will be. And once they assume you will be there," she shrugged slightly, "you already are." The Admiral-designate looked at her for a long moment. "The gap in your navigational database," he said, "that was real." "Completely real," she said. 14-year-old data, pure administrative oversight." "So you didn't come to Calvary on purpose?" "No," she said, "we came by accident." He was quiet again. "And yet," he said. "And yet," she agreed. Dorothea Sinclair retired 4 years later, at 67, after 34 years of survey work. Her retirement ceremony was small, the way she preferred things, her crew, a handful of colleagues from the Survey Corps, a brief acknowledgement from the United Earth Council that was more effusive than she was comfortable with, but which she endured with good grace. She went to live on the Oregon coast, in a house on a cliff above the Pacific, where the view reminded her of looking out at deep space, vast and dark and full of things you hadn't catalogued yet. The Calvary Accord held. The joint development project became one of the most productive resource-sharing arrangements in galactic history. The Varanthium technology changed human propulsion within 15 years. The Margaret Hale was retired from survey service 8 years after the Calvary incident and placed in the Human Space History Collection at the Titan Museum of Exploration with a small placard that read, Survey Vessel UES Margaret Hale. Site of First Contact, Calvary System, Crew 61. Below that, in smaller letters, were 4 words. Not the words Sinclair had said, those were reproduced in full elsewhere in the exhibit, with complete context and analysis, and a documentary that had been watched by approximately 900 million people. These 4 words were different. These 4 words were the ones that the exhibit's curator had chosen to put on the placard itself, believing them to be the truest summary of what had happened in the Calvary system on that morning, and what it meant, and what it would always mean. The 4 words were, she showed up anyway. Sinclair visited the museum once, 7 years after her retirement. She stood in front of the Margaret Hale for a long time, reading the placard, thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. She showed up anyway. She stood there until her knees reminded her that she was 74, and the museum had chairs. And then she found one of those chairs and sat in it, and looked at the old survey ship for a while longer. Outside the museum's observation dome, Saturn hung in the sky, huge, ringed, impossible-looking even after a lifetime of space travel, the way beautiful things remained beautiful regardless of how long you'd known them. Sinclair sat and looked at the ship and thought about 47 warships going quiet, about 6 minutes and 40 seconds, about the particular weight that silence carries when it means something has changed, and everyone in the room knows it, and nobody quite has the words yet. She thought about 4 seconds of transmission. She thought it was the truest thing I could say. She thought that's usually enough. Then she got up, because her knees had rested sufficiently, and she walked out of the museum into the thin Titan air and caught the next transport back to Earth, where the Pacific was waiting, and the cliff, and the view that looked like deep space, and the vast uncatalogued dark that had always been, for Dorothea Sinclair, less a source of fear than an invitation. There was always more to survey. There was always more to find. She showed up anyway. She always did.